So we got Revit Autodesk 2026, and by default, I have given you guys actually that template. So on Google, I mentioned yesterday, if you go over to our Google Drive, there's actually a set of templates. Keep in mind that 2023 will open up in all of them, right? Whereas in 2024, it'll only 2024 and on, 2025 and on, right? So you can open actually all three of those essentially in 2026. However, it is going to update the model. It does take about 10 minutes or so, depending on the speed of your computer. But then once it's updated and you save, it is now a 2026 Revit file, right? So just as we were mentioning yesterday, there is no backwards compatibility. But obviously for today, I want to go over a lot of the UI, which is the user interface, and just how different, of course, this program is from Rhino. Although that's not really the point of today, is to discuss how different it is, but to, of course, reveal all the different tools and differences, I guess you could say, between these programs. So for instance, I'm going to get rid of my, my topography there for a second. And as I mentioned, there is actually 3 different site files. However, what's also kind of nice about this, I bet you could even make that in Rhino, right? And we'll get to that maybe today as our startup. I don't know, maybe time won't permit. But in our case, you'll notice Revit basically has a few things. We have a properties browser, which essentially has everything on it, right? I mean, this is the list that contains everything that's, of course, in this file. And let's go ahead and talk about them. So you'll see in the properties browser that we have all the views, so the floor plans, and some of these I've actually given you, right? So that you don't necessarily have to start from scratch every single time. I think I've given you site and floor plan. Mine's kind of a hosh-posh. I should probably actually re-download it and then do it again, but we don't necessarily have that kind of time. We have our ceiling plans, which we won't actually need for this project. We have our 3-dimensional views. So like that's the view that we're essentially in right now, is that 3D tab. We got our elevations, we got our sections, we got legends, schedules, we got all the sheets. These are actually the ones that I've made for us. And let me go ahead and delete those. Each of these actually are based on a title block. So what's kind of interesting and nice about this is it's already to scale. And if I need it at a different scale, I just double click and change that view. Well, we'll definitely show you the coolness of this program. However, I've uploaded a template for us, and keep in mind the way that Revit works is it's kind of a catalog machine. It's organizing everything for us, but it's essentially a very large catalog. So you'll notice we have a title block catalog. If we double click on this, it's actually going to open up the title block, and I can move it very similar to like AutoCAD, right? So if I wanted to draw in it, you'll notice I've locked some things so that you can't do that, but you can unpin things, you can control things, you can change it to, you know, Professor Verret, right? And what's nice is it's going to change all the pages. I don't have to do that to every single page. And that's really useful because if I have a project that has 100 sheets, I don't want to sit there and change 100 sheets like I would in AutoCAD or Rhino. It is a parametric program, and what that means is essentially everything's connected to some sort of parameter. And that could be a very simple parameter or a very complex one. And you could actually make parameters in this program, but it's a pretty intense program to say the least. But you know, if I wanted to put the issues, the date, some of us may not even know what this is, but when you make a title block, the reason we have a title block is because it's a legal document. That's right. Eventually, construction documents are legal documents, which is why it's so important that you get a licensed professional in order to make that legal document. Instead of words, we use lines, right, in order for that legal document. When they go, oh, you used the wrong word, for us, it's you use the wrong line, right? A dash line means something different than a solid line. I mean, it's a little pedantic, but it could be used in court. The architect or the engineer used the wrong line type. Therefore, they're liable for why this construction is incorrect. Is that making some sense? So that line actually has a lot more power than you think. Just like the word, if you put S at the beginning of word, it's a sword. And that's what words do. They actually have the power to put you in jail, locked up forever. Not the person, the words do, right? We are actually word-controlled beings. But in our case, as an architect, that's why I like to stick with lines. In my case, I could load this into my project and basically overwrite it, and you'll see that immediately it changes these things. So it's kind of like updating my links, if you will. Now that's just a small scenario of everything that essentially works in this program. So as you can imagine, I could do that to elevations. If I double click on elevations, I've got actually a couple in here that let's go ahead and get rid of. That's from last semester. So we can kind of start fresh. It's also very different in terms of moving around. You'll notice your middle button, you have to have a mouse for this, right? You need a three button mouse because you'll use that to, of course, move. If you right click, it'll actually bring up a regular right click window, right? I've even set sometimes my Rhino to be more like Revit. That way, going in between these programs, I don't feel, disoriented every single time. I would say it's easier to change in Rhino than to change in Revit, so very often I actually change it to a standard of Revit. In our case though, as you can imagine, we have every single sheet here, sections, perspectives, and we'll get rid of those too. I basically deleted the model so that we could basically start fresh. But we got the site plan, and you'll notice, at least from, maybe I should pull that up, but you'll notice I actually set up some of the sheets for you, right? To make it easier, you don't have to pull this out of nowhere, and you don't have to make it. Some of this stuff, like I got from firms anyway, and the firm is naturally, they're gonna provide you a title block, right? They're gonna provide you the kinds of furniture they use, the kinds of cars, scale figures, the stuff, right, that they of course want you to use. So I've actually applied that as if you guys are all in my Crabapple Designs firm, right? So I've basically set it up to where, this is generally what you would kind of get. But if you may notice from the actual assignment, it is asking for a bit, and we see that it's a lot easier in this program. So you'll see that we need the site plan, second floor, 2 sections, all elevations, and of course 2 perspectives. So we definitely need all that, and to be fair, we could do stuff like this, and it's a little bit extra. Hopefully we can get to it. But in our case, that is the browser bar, and it holds the families, which is a unique way of saying all the different files. So it's got all the doors that we need, all the detail items, curtain panels, conduits, and if you wanted to just study the vocabulary of architecture, I mean, you could just look at the family list, all right, and be like, what's casework? Does anybody know what casework is? You have them all in your house. It's the drawers. Those are typically called casework, right? But what's really nice about this program, at least for me when I was starting, is it taught me a lot about the vocabulary of architecture, right? Such as like flex pipes. I was like, man, what are flex pipes? Or flex ducts? Oh, I know what a duct is, right? Duct tape, right? Of course, where that name comes from. But you got roofs, ramps, railings, profiles, and of course it's all in alphabetical order. But just in case you wanted to load a certain window, you could, right? And this is where you'd find it if you wanted to actually deep dive into this window. Maybe you wanted to turn it into a star window, not that you would, but this is where you would do it. Essentially clicking on that window, just like we did on the title block, we can actually, we could really get into the thick of it, right? We can also delete these things. You could double click on them and change everything about them down to their cost, down to their operation. All this stuff. This is what I mean by building information modeling. That way, potentially, I could tell Revit, how much does this building cost? And it can know every single material, square footage, every single area, every single piece of glass, everything. And that's really good because, well, if I'm making a skyscraper, I don't want to lose one pane of glass because that means extra cost. So obviously we use this, especially in architecture and construction documents, to actually predict how much something would cost and, relatively speaking, how do we build it, right? And who do we need to get to build it? But again, very intense software compared to Rhino, right? That's a little bit more intuitive. In our case, on the other side, we have the properties bar, which is probably my favorite because as soon as you click on something, it brings up entirely new properties. That's not absolutely new. Rhino does the exact same thing. But as you can imagine, there's different properties for just about everything, right? Particularly, actually, the DWG that I brought in has very different properties, and you'll actually see that it's called mytopolines.dwg. What that reveals is that you can actually make, you remember assignment 5 where we made topography and we had to start off with some lines? You could take that exact line DWG and stick it into Revit, and you can make whatever topography that you want. Now, I'll let you do that, especially if you pick a precedent project on a side of a hill. Let's make a side of a hill project. Now, you don't have to make it perfect, but I would do that in Rhino first and take in my DWG. Again, pretty intuitive, at least in some levels. However, as soon as you click on something, you'll see that immediately it changes the properties of those things, right? And they have all kinds of properties, and some of these you can actually make yourself. You can make families. In fact, we had a person in the firm that was his job all day, was to make Revit families. He'd make the door hinges, he'd make computer parts, he'd make chairs. I mean, that was his job, to just make computer parts. So, I mean, don't get me wrong, if you really like this program and this is your forte, there's definitely a job for you when it comes to building information modeling. But in our case, let's go ahead and get started. I'm just going to basically assume that I have an idea of what I'm doing today, but maybe we continue on the UI. So we have the properties bar, and of course that changes. You can also find the properties bar right here, just in case you lose it. If you want your window like mine, sometimes you do have to restart it, and it is the hardest button to find in the world. This little button, believe it or not, controls so much of the windows. So you'll see, if you click on this bar a couple of times, you'll notice sometimes by default it has like no tools available. Just siphon through these. There's actually a couple of presets of those tools. So if you're just absolutely like, man, where are the same tools that Revit is using? Click on this guy first and make sure you're in the right sequence of tools. However, you'll notice if you installed the architecture program, we have an architecture tab, which has walls, doors, and maybe let's make that viewable. So let's go to our floor plans, say second floor, and let's get rid of some of these things. In my case, you'll see all the kinds of errors that come up. It's like, whoa, are you sure you want to delete this? Because it's actually going to delete the entire view. That's another thing, is things are usually linked to another thing in a parametric system. So you'll notice that deleting a view actually does delete the view, right? And it's of course giving us an error message that tells us so. In my case, we're going to put those all down by ourselves anyway. But you'll notice now when I click on the architecture tab, I can create walls, doors, windows, components, which is like furniture or really anything outside of those three. We got columns, we got all kinds of columns, right? Some of these things even have drops. You can model things in place, but I don't recommend it. We got roofs, we got ceilings, we got just about everything. Let's see what else we got. Now it's stuck in roofs, my bad. However, you'll have to hit escape to get out of these commands, right? There we go. But for today, let's go ahead and do a wall. It looks like I've got an error message somewhere. Oh, there we go. It wants me to make a wall. So maybe let's go ahead and do that real quick. Just kind of show you the sequence of making something. It is kind of provocative. Don't get me wrong. There is something kind of nice to be able to just go like this, and suddenly you have architecture, right? I mean, don't get me wrong. It is pretty cool, the fact that I now have the inside, the outside relationship. I can click on a wall. I can switch this to say something else and immediately have a different wall, right? I can hit spacebar and flip that wall. So, I mean, there is really nice. In our case, we have the studs, we have the airspace, the sheathing, and of course like a brick or stone wall. And it is pretty nice that that was instantly drawn by just selecting a different wall type. For instance, now I could even change these wall types by clicking on these little, essentially little blue balls, right, if you will. They're more like, I guess, little nodes, but that is essentially the way that we control things in Revit. It is annoying I didn't make this program, but in our case, it is kind of nice to be able to still change things, right? But it is kind of locked into place, and as soon as I hit something, it's trying to help me out, right, a little bit, right? So there are some pretty interesting aspects about that. However, immediately if we go to, say, a three-dimensional view, it's already made it, right? And simply based on, again, the parameters. By default, it's 20 feet. I don't need 20 feet walls, but, again, I can click on a wall and instantly change these things to, say, 10 feet. And it updates, right? So, I mean, just a very different way of making a model. Keep that in mind, that if you can understand Rhino, honestly, we just have to learn the way Revit wants our input. And that's the best description I could probably give. In my case, I have a lot of tabs open. I don't really want to do that because it causes a lot of processing issues. I am running technically Windows and Macintosh at the same time, and that's pretty demanding, especially while screen recording. So I don't recommend it. In our case, let's go back to, say, just a regular floor plan. However, if you didn't have a floor plan, or say I'm pretty sure I put a floor plan on there, but by default there's just nothing there, right? One of the things you'll notice also, besides, we haven't even got to talk about all the other tabs, but you'll notice in each of these windows that we pull up, say the floor plan, the site, 3D model, doesn't matter, we have a series of buttons at the bottom. Now you can imagine some of these are pretty self-explanatory. One is scale. You can choose any scale, right? You no longer have to worry about making a box or anything like that. If I choose 1/8 scale, it's suddenly 1/8 scale. If I choose 1/4 scale or 3/32, it's suddenly 3/32, and that is kind of nice. You'll also see that we can control the visual, right? How fine it looks, how coarse it looks. So for instance, if I wanted to see more lines, I would select fine. If I wanted a higher quality, I typically just always select fine. We can also, very much like the viewports in Rhino, we can change it from a rendered view to a wireframe view to a shaded view. That's generally about the same. Don't click on realistic. You will crash your computer. If you're on a Windows computer, you'll be fine. But on a Macintosh, that's like the first way to crash your computer. It doesn't have a GPU, right? It's actually kind of a false GPU. So if you're using Parallels, realistic takes forever to load and very often actually crashes before it even gets to load. Very often I either leave it in hidden line or just kind of a shaded view. Honestly, I don't see a huge difference between textures and constant colors either. But in our case, let's just start drawing a floor, right? So I'll go to the floor tab, and essentially we'll get this modify tab that comes up. It's called modify and create floor, in our case secondary or boundary. So we have the ability to essentially create this boundary, and you can get fancy with the spices, but I really don't recommend it because, well, those are really hard to control in Revit. However, don't get me wrong, you could draw something technically in Rhino first and bring it over here and essentially trace it. And I used to do that a lot actually in school, just because it was a little bit easier, and I was already getting way more familiar with Rhino than I was particularly in Revit. So in my case, I am going to make a floor, and we'll just start with something simple. And in my case, I don't know, I kind of want this bridge element in my project, so I'm going to do something like that. And you'll kind of notice, if I leave something like this, it's not going to work. In fact, in Revit, it wants things to be closed and it wants things to be done in its own way. You'll notice that it immediately brings up, hey, you have an intersecting lines. I don't want that. I want one closed curve. So the best way to do that is to, of course, continue, right? In my case, I'm going to use trim. Trim is existing in Revit, but I can't just type in trim. I type in TR. Right, so if I type in TR, it immediately brings up a trim tool. However, you wouldn't know it because there's no indication of that. And the way trim works in Revit is clicking on the pieces that you want to keep. So for instance, I want to keep this bridge and I want to keep this side. Notice how it chopped that off. I do want that side though, right? So I may need to actually split it. How do I split it? SL. So if I use SL, I can split stuff all day long, right? SL again, and I can split those things. SL. I'm not gonna lie, Revit is kind of annoying when it comes to inputs, but it is kind of nice that I can do TR and essentially keep going. Is that making some sense? All right, that looks pretty good. It's a closed curve, but I have these two lines. Let's see if Revit likes that. Aw, man. All right, so the nice thing about Revit is it's going to try to tell you what's wrong. It doesn't always tell you what's wrong, right? I will say that, but it is kind of nice. It brings up lines must be closed loops, and the highlighted lines are open. That's really great because sometimes the line is like this big, and you're like, where the hell is it, right? And you'll see basically this orange circle going, hey, it's over here somewhere, right? And you'll delete it. In our case, again, I don't want to quit sketching. I just want to continue and get rid of those. I'll go back to my modified cursor and essentially just delete those. I do hate that Windows every time that I delete something, it brings up the noise. So I'll try and get rid of that later. But it does that. I'm sure it's just a Windows setting. I bet I need an update today. But again, what's also kind of nice about this, I can use my arrow keys, I can dial in some things, and that's pretty nice. I can use also DI. So far I've gone over TR for trim. You might want to write these down. TR for trim, SL for split, and DI for dimension. So if I hit DI, I can click on essentially anywhere, 2 points, and control these things. I can do it again. In fact, I can do it indefinitely until I basically click on that modify cursor. And what's kind of nice about this is, well, if I have a really nice sketch, or I started sketching my drawing already, also I can do multiple dimensions. Gosh, I wish Rhino would be able to do that sometimes.
Are you holding shift at all or no?
Not holding shift. That's the magic. Look, my second hand. Right? Not doing much of anything. Right? But I can dimension the entire project in seconds. That's really cool in a building situation, right? In studio, not really always necessary. I mean, sometimes the professor will say, hey, what are the dimensions of that? But usually you kind of make it up, or you know, because you've been drawing it so many times. But again, what's also nice about this is it's parametric. So if I immediately click on one of these lines, it goes and turns this blue. What's nice about that, as soon as I click on it, I go, well, I want this to be 13 feet, enter. And it makes it 13 feet, right? If I want that to be 10 feet, I'd click on this, change that to 10. And you kind of get the picture. It's kind of moving it for me, and I'm still kind of using key commands, right? But you'll notice, when in doubt, click on something, see if it has different properties, see if it has something that activates in at least a blue way. Now, by default, a lot of items are pinned, right? So you'll notice if I can't move something, it's because it's pinned. So I'll do pin to basically lock something. That's basically kind of like locking something in Revit. I don't type in lock, but I type in pin for pinning something. If I want to unpin something, I do up as in up, right? So if I do up, it unpins something, right? What's also nice about that, though, is this little pin tool. By the way, it doesn't scale, so no matter how scaled in or scaled out, it's the exact same size. It pisses me off because for me, zooming in means I want to see it better, right? But in our case, Revit doesn't want that. You can also click on this unpin tool, but it's like your push pin that you use for those pieces of paper. It's a pen, right? Put a pen in it, as they say, right? But you'll notice if something is pinned, essentially it won't move for anything. Like, I mean, shoot, it will tell you, hey, it's pinned, right? It's not going to move. So just be aware that some items by default are pinned, right? So if you're trying to sit there and move it, don't be a hero and waste an hour of your life. Just see if it's pinned or unpinned, those kinds of things. But that's looking pretty good, at least for our house today. Let's go ahead and check it. And in fact, it'll even tell you the area of this once we're finished. So I'll click finish. And if we click on it, it'll say, well, you have the area of 449 square feet. Well, that's great, but that's a tiny little house. So we probably need a little bit more. In my case, let's just expand it a little bit. And maybe let's expand it by a certain dimension. Let's go with 25 feet and press OK. Now let's check out the area. All right. Now it's a decent apartment of 800 square feet. But I think you kind of get the picture. What's nice about this program is immediately we have, almost as if we just typed in what on Rhino for every time we did something, we kind of have that being done simultaneously at all times, right? Whatever we're clicking on, and that is sometimes a bit of annoyance. But again, there is something kind of intuitive about this. I do appreciate being able to double click on something and immediately edit something, right? So if I needed this to be actually 20 feet out, and let's face it, in a building situation, that's kind of nice. I'd bring these drawings to my principal architect. He or she would redline them and give them back to me and go fix these things. And obviously I'd go back to my model and of course fix those things. But in my case, I am faking this till I make it. I didn't design a house last night, so I do apologize. I'm just gonna kind of do stuff on the fly. So I do need to decide some things, but let's get some walls first. I mean, and I need to establish maybe some elevations. So the next thing that I want to do is essentially go to my view. I'm going to click on my view and get some elevations. You'll notice I have a plethora of things to do here, but in my case, I can select a 3D view, like a detailed 3D view like we have by default. I can get a camera involved, which yes, works like Rhino. And I can even walk through and make a video of my building too, and that's really useful if you have 8 hours of time to render that video. But in our case, I can make a section, right? So we'll get some sections involved. Do that again. Let's get another section. I know I'm probably going to need 2 sections, and let's face it, I wish Illustrator or Rhino had something like that. The good news is, in Food for Rhino, there are plugins actually to make it more like Revit, And there are plugins for Revit to make it more like Rhino. In fact, Rhino is an open source, so somebody was able to make Rhino and put it as a plugin in Revit. We're not going to get into that because it is a little bit more advanced, but I think it's also really nice to see that people are realizing the creativity of Rhino and going, I wish these programs were together, right? So that is pretty nice. However, what's also nice about this is it immediately tells us where it's cutting in the model and how far it's cutting, right? So you'll notice if I click on this, this immediately actually goes, well, if I only wanted it to go back here, I could keep it back to there. Maybe I don't want to show that kitchen. Maybe I just want to show the living situation and maybe have it fall off at that little bridge. I could do that in this program, which is really nice. In our case, if I wanted to see back to this kitchen, I'm calling it a kitchen, I don't know what it is yet, but you know, I could, right? Same thing with just about anything that you click on. By default, usually they're somewhere else, right? Based on the parameters of this project. However, I do need elevations, so let's go ahead and get an elevational view. You'll notice that we have two options, a framing elevation, which if I've never used in my life, or just a regular elevation. You'll notice that it kind of try to help you, right? You see how like the arrow, it's kind of stuck, kind of facing one way. If I had some walls, it would actually start to maybe dissect that. Well, maybe let's actually make some walls first. So I'll go to architecture, I'll type in wall, and you'll see you get the same modify box just like we did with the floor. It's asking for either a drawing or there's this wonderful little tool called pick lines. So in my case, I can pick the line. I can decide a couple of things like, well, I want all these walls to be 20 feet. I don't know about that. Maybe let's go with 12 feet. And maybe I want them to be offset. Maybe I want them to be with the finished face on the interior or the finished face on the exterior. In my case, I'm going to consider that that's my exterior line. So I'm going to finish face exterior and just click. And suddenly I've got some walls. I'm not going to do any walls for the bridge. Maybe I should. I wanted to be cool today. But we can always switch these walls too, right? And I had two lines in there. That's why it picked basically two lines. It basically kept the split, right? But now if I want to change these walls to maybe say, oh man, actually I want these to be stone, I would need to select each wall, hold option if I'm on, hold control if I'm on the Mac, and I would hold also control on Windows. Actually that kind of works out, both the same button. But I could basically select these walls and go, well, actually I want these to be glass walls. Okay. And it's going to say, whoa, bro, hold up. You have the wrong math here, and that's okay. You can just unjoin these elements. But I could instantly turn that into a different situation. It looks like it kept my old piece, so let's get rid of that. Get out of here. And I may have to go find my piece real quick. Right now, in my three-dimensional view, I have my section box on, which basically is a box of section. I'll unclick that real quick. Oh, there it is. Right. So what is nice is you can move this entire piece, but it is a little bit more difficult. So in my case, let's just scoot that over using my arrow keys. My bad. To be fair, I could just move the topography too, right? But in my case, as you can see, it essentially turned that instantly into a 3D model. I didn't have to do all that. I didn't have to extrude, sweep anything. And there are some really nice things about this program, right, when it comes to modeling things quickly. However, that's a heat trap going on. So there is that. But in our case, also another way Revit works is by clicking on something. That is actually what controls our center view. So just like in Rhino, how you can zoom extends to a certain object, Revit is automatically doing that when you click on an object. So if I click on this object, it automatically centers to that, both in view and rotation, right? So if I want to rotate around this wall, again, I can rotate around that wall. If I want to rotate around the entire surface, right, now it's center justified. So, you know, just some things to be called out. Another thing you may notice me using is this view box, and that's pretty nice. Again, I wish Rhino had some of these things, but instantly can change the view. You know, instead of having to click on the drop window in the view tab, I simply click on this box and of course can get a perfect elevation or the side view or the bottom view, and there is something really nice about that, right? But again, I can hold shift and use my middle button to of course flip that back over, just like I would in Rhino or any other three-dimensional program. However, that's looking pretty good. Oh no, my floor plan. Oh, it's over there, right? So no big deal. I had to move it. And of course, you can actually still toggle these things. They're still movable in a larger sense. However, that's looking like a really big scale. So again, I'm going to change my scale. Notice what happens. What changed, the building or the annotations? It actually reveals that, okay, the annotation size is based on my scale, right? Something that I didn't know actually graphically standard-wise until, honestly, I started learning Revit, right? So some of us, who have gigantic graphic scales out there, maybe we start to realize we don't need those. It's actually taking up the drawing, right? In our case, I'm going to stick to 1/4 because that's a typical scale in terms of construction drawing. Keep in mind, usually the smallest size on the field is 36 by 24, whereas the largest size that we have on field is like sometimes 48 by 5 feet, right? I mean, you can get a 4 by 5 foot drawing, and that's very typical of a skyscraper with multiple sets, right? The bigger the drawing, the more detail we can add in the scale. But in our case, it's adding that detail by making the detailed items smaller, right? In my case, I don't actually want curtain walls just because they're kind of detrimental. We may get into them because you can edit them a lot. But I'm just going to stick this to maybe like a typical wall. So I'm going to go with like an exterior brick on stud. Sweet. And we'll do that, right? You'll see also it changed the poché. Those are determined by the family type, and I can show you how to change those too. Anyway, we'll get to them. In my case, maybe I want some doors. So I'll type in DR for door, like doctor, DR. And immediately it's like, hey, where do you want it? You want it here? You want it there? You want it here? But you'll notice I can't just put one in the middle of the room, right? So this is another way that Revit works, is everything is attached to everything. So a door can't just be a door. In fact, what we know about doors and windows is that they're attached to something. All these windows, they're attached to a wall. All the doors in this building, they're attached to a wall. So what they call it in Revit is hosting. You'll even see something that says like define a new host, but basically that's what we're doing right now, is defining the host for this door. Now I don't want a frameless glass door unless I was making a shower, so I've loaded some doors for you. Obviously some pocket doors, some single flush doors, and a pivot door just because pivot doors are cool. In my case, before I do something heavy, Revit will typically ask you to save something as well. I think I am going to go with the kitchen or living situation. I don't know, maybe we walk into the living room, and that's pretty nice. But you'll see immediately as soon as you click on something, it changes it, right? Just also, if I were to edit type and change this into, instead of, a 4-foot door, I'm going to say, well, I'm going to make it an 8-foot door, right? And of course, if I apply that, it should change this, but it didn't. So obviously a different family type. If I double click on that door, I can actually change the parameters of this family, but I don't want to get into the thick of it because that's far more advanced than I actually want to show you. Let's do actually a door that will change. So something like a typical door. If I were to go to edit type, duplicate, and say I want a 4-foot door, so I'm going to make a new family. I just duplicated this family so that I can basically make it my own and change that to a 4-foot situation. Apply, and it'll essentially make that door bigger, right? Now what's kind of nice is now I have a 4-foot door and a 3-foot door, and I can switch that back to a 3-foot or switch that back to a 4-foot. But again, I've made a copy based on what I already had, and you're definitely welcome to do stuff like that. You'll notice with these objects, if I hit spacebar, I can flip them in all kinds of directions. You can also use these little blue arrows, which are extremely hard to find when you're way out here. So again, there are some intuitively nice things about this program. But let's see, what's next? We can get some windows. Window is WN, so window, and you'll see we essentially have the same things. Right? We can click and select a host, and it immediately changes those things. If we go to the 3-dimensional, voila. Right? We eventually, I mean, there is something kind of nice about Revit, right? It's pretty intuitive, at least in that sense. You could even actually go over here and place those windows too. And in the floor plan, it actually shows the ones that are getting cut, right? Now, you'll notice I have a window here that isn't being shown, and that's probably because it's too high or too low, right? So since the window is too high, it's not going to cut there, right? It is going to kind of show it if I highlight, that it is there. So there is a window there, but it's not showing it in floor plan. Don't get me wrong, I could change the view range of my floor plan, right? So what is that view range? Well, that's that cut line I'm always asking for on my elevations of my students, right? So essentially, if I type in this view range, check out this diagram. Again, this program teaches you a lot about architecture, again, if you've never taken D1 or D2 or D4 or any of those classes. But essentially, we're controlling the cut line, and it actually gives us some of the parameters of the things that it's controlling, right? So we have the view range, we have the bottom point, we have the cut line, and we have the ceiling point. So we have the top, the cut plane, the bottom, and of course the view depth is the entire piece. Now, of course, you won't see me explain it on the video. So again, what is nice about this program is when in doubt, especially when you click on a command, it is going to try and help you, right? So you'll notice this is its diagram trying to help us at least understand a view range. But, you know, if I switch this to 5-foot cut and press apply, now I see all the windows, right? So be very careful. This program is weird like that. It is actually going to go to the graphic standard. So again, sometimes by default, it teaches us a lot about this program. In my case, one of the requirements is to make this a 2-story. So I do want to start talking about stairs, but I forgot. I was going and talking about elevations because I do want to set the standard of how high something should be. Keep in mind, this is not an intuitive program. It's almost like I've already designed it actually in AutoCAD, and now I'm making a construction document. So some of those things I've already decided, like a 12-foot foot plate in terms of, well, I want from my floor to ceiling to be 9 feet, and then the top floor to be 12 feet. I do have to make these decisions already, typically before I even get into Revit, because they're a little bit difficult to change once I've locked in some certain items. So for instance, I'll make my elevations, and this is where you'll kind of see that arrow kind of help us out. If I hit this side, it's going to change the arrow. If I go to this side, it's going to change that arrow facing the correct direction. So I'm just going to give us some elevations. We need all 4. Voila, we have all 4. From there, you can actually double click on this piece, this view, and it'll bring you to the elevation that it is, right? That's super helpful, except, well, it's not really on a sheet yet. So you'll notice if I go to elevations, they're like, what gives? I got no elevations. It is kind of weird, but if you go to elevations, you can actually drag these right on. And you'll notice in the the project browser, these now turn blue to indicate that they're somewhere on the sheet. What is weird though, I can't double it. Just like a true graphic standard, I can't, and I shouldn't be able to put the same drawing twice because that may confuse somebody on the field. Refer to this drawing, what do you mean there's 2 drawings that I'm referring to, and sometimes they're completely different drawings. This happened a lot in the AutoCAD days where somebody had to go and verify these things. Now it's been parametrically connected to where I can't even mess up, right? So now if I go back to my floor plan, in fact, it should actually tell me, oh, it's located on A20, number 2. Well, that's great because on the elevation of A20, it is number 2. Again, everything is of course referencing to each other. Now this is something you'll learn in Tech 1 and Tech 2, how we go about actually construction documents. But again, this is the best way to throw yourself into that is of course learning Revit because it wants actually the true standards of architecture or engineering or whatever firm that you eventually handle in this program. However, I didn't make this program, and moving some of these things is extremely annoying, like say this little title bar. I can't make this line smaller by clicking on it. I literally have to click on the viewport in order to make that smaller. Again, very weird, but the stuff you get used to in this program is very interesting. I've also given you a couple of these. For instance, you can change this viewport to like titleless if you don't want it to be there. That's kind of true sometimes of perspectives, or if you want a regular viewport, there's a little bit bigger. Some of these things, again, I don't want you to waste your time changing font sizes and little view bars. So again, I've made all these and made them when I was actually working at certain firms. I did take some of them, right? I mean, why? I made them, so. In our case, you'll also know that there's a bounding box by default. I can double click on here, and there is a button that controls that. So you'll see that there's a crop view, which actually controls the rest of the drawing. So I can actually uncrop it, if I wanted to see more or go, oh man, I actually need a little bit of that part involved too. And I can control that pretty separately. So this is basically a frame and the crop tool. So I can turn that off, and I can turn the actual frame off as well, right? So if you wanted something to look a little bit more realistic. Now in my case, I've added these a couple last time, so I'm gonna get rid of them because I wanna show you how to make them, on your own. And in my case, I do wanna make a second floor. Maybe I do wanna make it 12 feet. I don't know, maybe I wanna go 14 feet. Awesome, I'll make it 14 feet, but you'll notice my walls didn't continue with it. Shouldn't it? I mean, after all, it's a parametric program. So essentially I can take these walls, I can tell the top constraint to, instead of being unconnected, to be now connected to my second floor. As soon as I do that, it immediately goes to the second floor. What's really interesting is, well, maybe later on in the project, my client goes, oh, I actually want 16-foot ceilings. Okay, I've got the budget, so I'll change that to 16 feet, and you'll see immediately my walls now continue with it. Also, that's kind of nice, is you can just move these two, and of course, it moves them down. We'll go with 13.6 today, right? No big deal. Obviously, this is a pretty fictitious situation. However, by default, it looks like that floor that I brought in was accidentally at 3 feet instead of 0. So let's change that back to 0. And of course, it's going to put it now on the first floor. I do have a low level just because last time I did a basement. I don't think I'm going to do a basement this time. You don't really need it. But in our case, now we can see that we have the floor. And as soon as you click on something, again, it tells you immediately what it is. Again, there are some nice things about this program. I can still change the wall, right? But keep in mind that it'll immediately become unconnected, right? It's now connected to second floor, but then I've added an offset, right? So you can still change things, but be careful because you can kind of undo your constraints that you actually made, right? So in my case, I'll go back. But there's elevations in a nutshell. Right, we'll go back to my floor plan for today, and let's get into some stairs. I have about 20 minutes left. Well, let's face it, this one will probably go to 11. All right, I'll try and end it at 10:45, but there's just plenty to do in this program. We could talk about it, like I said, for 16 weeks and still not get through half the program. But I do want to get into at least a sense to where you can start getting started, right? All right, what's next? Some stairs. We'll go to the architecture and we'll look for stairs. I mean, don't get me wrong, we got railings, we got mullions, we got curtain grids, whatever those are, right? We got model tests. Oh, stairs, right? And we'll notice that there's one for ramps too. However, stairs, it is a little bit funky. I would say I'd still refrain from the spiral stair, but it's available, right? You could make a very grandiose stair. For instance, I could, start with a circle, and I can control the radius, and shoot, we can get an awesome stair in here where we start here and of course go up. There is something kind of nice that I literally just took 2 clicks and I immediately have a stair like this. That actually reminds me of Liz's project, right? Where she has actually these very unique curvilinear stairs, and I bet it was a pain in the butt to model, right? Lo and behold, there was a plugin like this the entire time. You'll also notice that it made the exact amount of stairs that I need, right? I didn't have to type in any amount of stairs. I didn't have to do any calculations, in fact. If I now double click on these stairs, right, we'll see that there is a number of options. In fact, I've loaded some stairs for us, just like any other piece. However, if you double click, it does turn into an edit mode, and I can basically redraw these stairs. However, it's easier said than done, because as you can see, now I'm basically at the whim of these control points in order to do something, and Revit doesn't like that. Honestly, I usually delete the stairs if I mess up and just try again, right, to be completely honest with you. But since we have a typical run of stairs, keep in mind that when I make some stairs, it's based on those levels. So if I was making a stair from level 2 to level 3, I'd need to be aware that I need to make a level 3 and a level 4, right, in order to actually continue to these elevational lines. In my case, since we're just doing first floor to second floor, let's do it. It's going to calculate that for us. So again, what's kind of nice, as soon as I start drawing, it's going to go, okay, where do you want it? Well, I don't want that side, so I do want the other side. I'm going to go with the left support, and I'm going to go along the wall. you'll see that it even calls out what we need. 6 risers created and 15 remaining. So it's even done the calculation for us. So as you can see, I don't have enough space to go up all the way, otherwise I'm gonna exit my building. In my case, I'm gonna go up to where I have a formidable landing, click, and if I click again, it's gonna continue those stairs. So again, yeah, slightly off, so let's try that again. Go back to my stair, and it does kind of have a similar smart tools like, you know, other programs. And if I hold shift, it does absolutely nothing, you know. So that is kind of the things that are different also from Rhino as well. But now I got some stairs, and it does go all the way to the 21st riser, and it even calls out the number of risers that I do have. Again, super nice and graphic standards. When you have a construction drawing, what do you think you should put on your stairs so that somebody makes them correctly? The number of risers, the number of treads. I kid you not. And I guess the reason this is, well, there's a language barrier, right? Let's face it, not everybody knows English in every single country. And often we have all kinds of workers on our field, whether they know German or Spanish, it doesn't matter. They can read a number, right? And numbers are pretty universal. So again, calling out these things could mean the difference between getting sued for it being built wrong or not, right? In my case, once I was finished, I could hit check mark. And of course, it's even gonna graphically do the standards for us. There's that break line, and there's all the lines above us. I know some of you guys are like, the time that I've spent in Rhino, the time I've spent in Illustrator, let alone a program was doing it literally all at once. There are things enticing about Revit, but let's face it, it's Revit, right? In our case, if we go, we got the rails too, we got everything, right? All we need is a floor now. So let's go ahead and add that floor. Now, I guess I'll make 2 floors. It's gonna be a weird looking building, but yeah, let's do it. So I'm gonna go ahead and go to my second floor, double click, and there's those stairs. And it shows me absolutely nothing else, right? So one of the things that we wanna control first is maybe the rest of the building. So in our case, I may have to change my view range. I may actually just have to do what is called, I forget what it's called, an underlay, right? So you'll notice it says range base level, right? So there's an underlay, and you'll notice that it's turned off. In my case, I want to turn on this underlay, and I want to show the first floor. Sweet. Now it shows the first floor. Now it's not really there. I can't really click on it. It's just more like a layer, if you will. You'll also notice that by default, oh man, there's a frame cutting off my piece. So I'm going to turn on my frame, or not my shadows, my frame.
Wait, you can put the shadows on the floor plan?
You can put the shadows on the floor plan. We don't need that, but you could. I want the actual frame, that way, of course, I can actually, you know, have some of my drawing without showing all of my drawing. That's looking pretty good, so of course I'll go ahead and turn that off and turn off the crop as well. It's at the right scale, so we're pretty good to go, but as Gavin was mentioning, yes, it's true. There is just a button for shadows on every single piece. So if I was to go to like elevation and hit the shadow button, I immediately get shadows, right? It's going to calculate all of that for us, just like any other digital program. But don't get me too sidetracked on this program, because let's face it, I'll go into another tangent. But we got some stairs. We don't necessarily need the shadows, so we'll turn those off. And let's go ahead and draw the second floor. I'll go to architecture, I'll go to floor, and essentially just draw it, right? Usually by default, I just kind of draw whatever and fake it till I make it, right? I mean, for instance, I typically draw something and then actually just hone it in, right? So if I wanted that floor to actually meet the wall or the exterior, very often the wall goes up, not the floor, right? So for instance, I may actually need to bring some of my walls up to the second floor, or come up with an entirely new wall system, which I guess we could do too. In my case though, it's just gonna hit my head, right? I'm gonna be like, oop, right? So I need to make a hole. Well, how do I make a hole? I can't do wire cut. I can't do Boolean difference. So I'll have to double click, excuse me, and essentially draw it. So in my case, I'm gonna draw the hole that I need. And let's say that was like slightly off too. I'd be like, ah, man, I drew that a little bit wrong. I could hit AL. You might want to write that one down. AL is align. So if I wanted to align something to another, I can do AL and go, I want to align there, and it brings up kind of a construction line, and click the piece that I want to align to. Well, that's pretty sweet, but if I press OK, it's going to go, whoa, you got some overlapping lines. So I'm going to do TR and basically make the perimeter of that piece. Now, once I hit check mark, now there's essentially a hole there. However, by default, it accidentally went to like 3 feet in the sky. That's okay. I forgot what I did to make that default that way, but I'll switch it back to 0, and we'll see that our stairs are perfect. They go to the exact step that we need. In my case, though, it does look like I need some more walls, so let's go ahead and make some more walls. Double click, WA for wall, and we'll just do kind of an inset wall, right? I mean, something pretty typical, an interior wall or an exterior wall of 6.5 inches. Again, you start to really learn about architecture. So I'm going to do kind of an interior wall. It's kind of nice. I set my post shade to be orange just because I could. Just in case you were wondering, why is it orange? But as you can see, not too shabby. I'll hit escape to basically exit that command. And I could further manipulate this, right? So if I wanted to do walls again and, I don't know, get some interior walls going, definitely could, right? So maybe potentially I have like a back closet with restroom and, I don't know, a bedroom right here. Well, let's do that. So I can take this wall and, of course, actually slide it over too. Again, you can also split walls, by the way. So I did SL on that wall, and of course can split a wall in order to manipulate it, right? So you can manipulate things, but it is like pulling teeth compared to other programs. But I could delete stuff and, of course, continue it again too. And you can technically move walls too. So there is something kind of nice about that in terms of being able to maneuver. However, I got a lot going on here, so I don't know if that's potentially a space, but I don't know. For me, I've designed houses. I've designed about 127 of them. So immediately some of these things kind of pop up like, oh, okay, this will be my bathroom with a slight walk-in closet. There will be my bathtub, these kinds of things. Most of these things you start to even memorize. Does anybody know what a typical bathtub is in length? 6 feet. Right? Now, the smallest you can go is 5 feet. And you may have actually noticed, if you have had maybe a cookie cutter house in your life, a very typical bathroom is 9 feet by 5 feet. 5 feet actually being established by the tub, right? However, I could do those automatically. However, I do a lot of high-end residential stuff, and let's face it, their minimums are a little bit different than our minimums, if you will. They can afford them. In our case, their typical minimum is 6 by 3 feet. So in my case, I could set that up, right, by essentially giving myself some dimension lines and, of course, setting those things into place. Don't get me wrong, this is assuming I've already designed this on paper, sketched it out, thought about these things, and I'm simply now taking a sketch and applying them basically to a construction drawing. Let's take a look at the three-dimensional. Oh my gosh, floating walls. That's okay. You can take these walls, and you could actually do it all at once if you wanted to, so I'll hold Control. And we could basically change the bottom constraint as well. So you'll notice there's a bottom constraint or a base constraint, which is second floor, but I can have it continue too. So if I wanted it to be 12 inches above, right, it'll basically, 12 feet above, I could basically move that wall. It's not as intuitive as like typing move and being able to move stuff. I can't no longer do that, right, especially in Revit. But I can control things with numbers. So for instance, if I took all those walls again, and I did say a skirt of a negative 12 inches, it's going to bring that down because it's essentially controlling the base. You guys saw that? It kind of moved the whole thing down though, right? So I may still want a top constraint. So I may need to go back again to my elevation and make one, right? So actually this is a good spot because I need another floor. What do I do? Well, I'll go to architecture, I'll go to level, and basically make a new level, right? So in my case, create plan view. That's a good box to check because it's going to make a new plan for me. If I don't check this box, it'll just be a regular grid line. So I do want to make a view for myself. I'm going to go 3 stories. I went 4 stories last time and kind of regretted it. So let's go 3 stories with this tutorial this semester. So we got 3, and it's level 17 because I've made so many of these, right? However, we can go back and we say level 3. However, if it's already used, it's going to go, whoa. Do you want to change everything to, instead of level 17 to level 3? Yeah, I do, right? Because level 17 does not exist. However, we could also just call it second floor. However, I've already made a mistake. These should, of course, be all caps, because everybody knows we use all caps, and of course, architecture, right? Usually that's a pretty defaulted. However, you may notice it's like, dude, this elevation is barely showing anything. There's no view range, right? Now I can control that 2 ways. If I go back to floor plan and I click on that view, it's gonna, oh, it's only going back that far. Of course it's only gonna show me like nothing, right? So I'm gonna make sure that it goes all the way through the building, and I could even elongate that stuff as well. Be really careful though, because as soon as you move this, sometimes it actually moves this piece. Now if you start editing it first, it's okay to move it. It'll lock that place. Again, I didn't make this program. I'm just trying to explain the very funky way that Revit works, and it is a little funky, at least compared to other programs. But now that I can move it around is because basically I've set this in place first. But now if we double click on this, I see a lot more of the building, right? And if I wanted to instantly know the shade and shadow, we could, right, essentially, right? All those kinds of things. You can also edit in these views. So for instance, if you notice that still wasn't like far enough, you can control some of these things. But you'll notice, man, my floor's in the way, stuff like that. What can I do? What can I do? Well, we can double click. You can control things in 3 dimensions. I can do AL, and I could say, well, I want you to go into the inside of this wall. So I'm going to select it to align to this wall and click. Again, I know I make it look easy, but it does get a little weird. We'll press OK, we'll press check mark, and we no longer have that piece in the way. Now I can take this wall and basically change those constraints. Now what is nice is as soon as I change that manually, it does change it physically as well. So it now revealed that it was negative 18 inches, right? So again, I know it sounds like I'm talking science now, because we're no longer talking intuition. We're no longer talking design. We're talking building, right? There's a certain amount of inches. There's just about dimensions to anything. And if this scares you, don't let it, right? Because I will say you won't get to this point, honestly, until you either go for a job or until your master's, right? And if it does scare you, I don't know. Maybe you need to just maybe take that Tech 1 or Tech 2 class a little sooner, and you'd be absolutely fine, right? Some of you may be absolutely terribly excited, like, oh my God, finally a program that's listening to me, right? And it knows exactly what I know. But there is that. I like to say that caveat because this program can be scary, especially making the jump from program to program. And just keep in mind, we're just going over it to introduce it. And in fact, I grade this one pretty softly, which is why I make it the final project. That way, we can just see if you're testing your skills and your intuition in terms of learning new programs. Because let's face it, in architecture, we're expected to know a lot of programs, arguably a lot more than just about any other field. But that's looking pretty sweet. Not too bad. Maybe we'll end it with getting a roof on it today. What have I not gone over so far? Usually I let the roof be a secondary thing. Maybe we talk about the outside. So let's go to my site plan. So what's kind of nice is you can edit these inside of the viewport and the sheet, and honestly I usually do, especially in the real world. I'll click on the sheet and then actually be able to edit these things. So for instance, I can still, change things on this sheet, but it's also really, really small, and it's actually showing us true scale. So if we double click on this viewport, it's going, hey, I'm giving you a 1 to 20. What's also nice about this is if I change it to 1/4, it immediately shows you how big it is on the page. You can immediately see if things are gonna fit or not fit. So for instance, maybe, I don't know, I wanna go with 1/4 scale. let's go with 1/4 scale. Now, maybe not. This is actually the site plan, so we should do something a little bit more appropriate. Let's maybe go with 1/16, and we can rotate it. Why not? Now, you'll notice I can't just type in rotation, but I can type in RO. But it won't do anything to this view. If I double click on it, and I click on the frame itself, you'll notice it is, I didn't actually click on the frame. I clicked on my DWG. If you notice that you have things that are like on each other, right? So for instance, let's show my frame. You'll notice that sometimes your frame is on the piece. If you type in tab, you can actually flip through the things that it is, right? So for instance, you know, like in Rhino, when you accidentally click on something and it pulls up a little window that goes, which line are you talking about? Well, Revit kind of has the same thing, but it doesn't show you it. Essentially, it wants you to go through it by clicking on tab. So again, this video is for reference. The idea is to pause and test some of these things yourself. Again, I know we have 2 weeks, which is why I've explained this house does not have to be complex. It doesn't have to be your masterpiece, right, if you will. We just want to learn the program. So if you end up just making a 2-story box that looks like a cookie cutter house, totally fine. I'm not actually grading the design, by the way. I'm grading really the effort and the amount of exploration. So in our case, I can click on this frame, rotate, so RO is to rotate, and it is a very weird rotation. It basically, hey, where do you want the base point? I'm going to select the middle. And it's very weird. You'd think that rotating this way would actually rotate the drawing that way. Nuh-uh. It's actually the opposite in Revit. Effing weird. You don't know how long it took me to like wrap my head around that, but it is apparently correct, right? At least Revit correct. But as you can see, I control the frame in order to control the drawing because, well, unfortunately, if I rotate this, guys, so let's say I'm going to unpin this, I'm going to rotate it. If I rotate this, it's going to actually rotate the model. Uh-oh, that's not what I want, right? So I can actually control the frame, right, when I rotate something. Anyway, probably more information than you need in your first take. I will probably end it here for today just because I'm getting into the thick of it. And next time I want to talk about kind of the more detailed stuff like making roofs and structures and columns and all kinds of things. However, this should be enough to get started, at least in taking your sketches and now at least starting to model it in the way that Revit wants to model. It's enough to get familiar with the properties bar, the project browser, and of course all these wonderful tabs. By the way, we've only gotten to architecture, right? And we only use like 3 of them so far. To be fair, there's just so much we can do in this program. But I would say arguably it's enough to get started. So in our case, just to kind of recap, we went over some of these project views, and yes, I should save. We went over how, you know, some of these viewports actually work compared to how they are on the sheet. We went over some of the tablature information, right? Such as the way that we input stairs and the way we input floors and doors, windows, these kinds of things, that they're all categorized. We went over elevations, site plans, and how to get them onto each other. We started designing and basically went over some of the minute things of basically modeling, right? How to control the model, how the model moves, and essentially things in between. I don't know, something about me just wants to put a door there. So let's you guys know the minimum door that we need for a bathroom? Non-ADA. This is where you really start to test your skills, right? 2 feet. You only need a 2-foot door in a residential area. Now, if somebody is an ADA requirement, do you know the width of the door? 3 feet.
3 feet.
You guys got to start noticing these things out in the real world. You start to realize, hey, why is this door so big? It must be for ADA. There must be a reason, right? However, history throws that out all the window when you see a 40-foot bronze door and you're like, who is this for? 40-foot people? I don't know, right? But in our case, there is some architectural standards, right? And we do implore them, and this program does force us to use that. If I haven't explained that enough in this video, is that we instantly have to put on our architect hat and at least play architect, right? We have to start to know some things about sizes or basic construction, right? Now, I have loaded some of this in for you to, of course, make it easier. However, as I've mentioned before, one of our favorite programs of all time, BIM Object, this is where this place becomes really useful. Now, I'll go over this firstly in the next part, but as you can imagine, instead of using Rhino this time, we'll switch to Revit. And boy, is there a lot of Revit models that we could talk about, right? We can even load entire families that come from the manufacturer. That way there is no discrepancy between the manufacturer and of course how our building gets built. This is a lot of the way that architecture works now because it saves money and accountability. I can no longer secretly add $2,000 worth of installation and just put it on my paycheck, can I? Right? Because now it's all accounted for. So it even starts to reduce corruption within the building environment as well. However, they're still kind of corrupt. On the bid, they just add the 10% anyway, right? But that's a story and political story, I guess, for another day. But in terms of that, definitely enough to get started. So I will end it here for today, unless there's kind of just a general question that maybe rose a red flag as I was describing. Hopefully some excitement. Any major questions, guys? All right, let's get started.
What is the topography you gave us in 2D?
Yes, so that was a great question. Gavin just asked, is the topography you gave us in 2D? It is. So you'll notice by default, and maybe we'll end it with that because it's just so terribly easy. You can take DWG drawings, you can essentially go to massing and site, and we can go to basically topsoil, and we'll basically create from import, right? So that's an import that I basically put in there. If you want to know how to import it, again, we'll go to insert, and we can insert a CAD file, right? That's basically what I did. But if you want to use the one that I gave you, we can go to create from import, and it's going to go, whoa, where do you want it? And well, in my case, I need to switch my view. You won't have to do this. By default, it's usually set to a floor. So for instance, I'm going to set it to first floor and just be okay. I'll explain that in part 2. Please remind me. Okay. But in our case, I could take this piece, topsoil, create from import, and basically tell it, I want this piece, but I only want from CAD. So I'm going to select my CAD, select on CAD. And in this case, it actually brings up the layers that I brought in. So in my case, I've made those topography lines. Select the topography lines and press OK. And it's going to suddenly make a surface for me. Now, that's a good ballpark. As you can see, it kind of messed up in certain areas, and I can basically control those points. And maybe that's what we'll start off with first. So maybe a slight preview into what we should do. I could definitely make that into an entire class, just topography alone. But thank you for reminding me. Yeah, that DWG, you can essentially turn any DWG. So potentially, you can actually take a Rhino A file. You could even take your exercise 5 and take those lines exactly in and see what they create. But again, at least for the sake of tutorial, I'll start on that one for part 2, talking about topography and roofs and structures. By the time we get to the end, I'm basically talking about how Revit kind of has Illustrator in it. So we'll stick to the plan. But at least in terms of getting started, plenty to get started. Keep in mind, we'll have a work day tomorrow so that I can help explain and kind of guide you through it. And we'll do another tutorial on Thursday. Sound good?
Yeah.
All right.
How do you usually get the